The bell above the gun store door gave a dull ring as she stepped inside, shaking the dust from her boots. The place smelled like oil, old wood, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a hot plate. It was a small-town store, the kind where the same people sat on the same stools every Saturday, talking louder than they needed to, pretending they knew everything about everything. She walked in quietly, almost like she didn't want to disturb anyone. Her clothes were simple. Faded jeans, a plain dark jacket, and a worn cap pulled low over her forehead. She did not look like someone special. She did not look like someone dangerous or important. Just another woman running errands on a weekend. 3 men sat at the counter, leaning on their elbows with paper cups of coffee. They were in the middle of a loud conversation about hunting and real shooters. Their laughter bounced off the walls lined with rifles, shotguns, and old metal signs. The young clerk behind the counter glanced up when the door opened. He saw her, gave a quick half-smile out of habit, then looked back at his phone. She didn't fit the picture he had in his head when he imagined serious customers. No tactical vest, no big belt buckle, no loud voice. He assumed she was just there to look around, maybe ask a few confused questions, and leave without buying anything. She moved slowly, eyes calm, studying the racks with quiet focus. Her steps were steady, not rushed, like she had all the time in the world. She didn't hover around the small, cheap handguns near the front. Instead, she walked straight to the wall where the long rifles were displayed. One of the men at the counter noticed and smirked. He nudged his friend with his elbow. "Watch this," he muttered under his breath. "She's going straight for the big ones." The others chuckled. They didn't bother lowering their voices. They were used to this place being their space, their stage where they could laugh and judge anyone who walked through the door. She stopped in front of a row of rifles and tilted her head slightly, reading the small tags carefully. Her eyes scanned over calibers, barrel lengths, and model numbers. The movements were small, controlled. No rushing, no nervous fidgeting. "Need any help there?" the clerk finally called out, his tone light and a little lazy. She turned toward him and gave a small nod. "Yes," she said. Her voice was soft but clear. "Can I take a closer look at that one on the end?" The clerk followed the direction of her finger and raised his eyebrows. It was one of the more expensive rifles, the kind people like to talk big about, but were scared to actually fire. "That one?" he asked, surprised. "You sure? It's a bit much for starting out." The men at the counter smirked again. One of them tried not to laugh and failed. She didn't react. "I'm sure," she said simply. The clerk shrugged, stepped over, and carefully took the rifle down from the rack. When he handed it to her, he kept his hands under the stock for longer than needed, as if he expected her to struggle with the weight. But she took it smoothly, her grip natural, the motion almost practiced. Her fingers found their place without hesitation. The butt of the rifle rested against her shoulder as she raised it slightly, sighting down the barrel. Her fingers stayed off the trigger. Her stance shifted a little, balanced, like this was something her body remembered, not something she was trying to impress anyone with. The older man at the counter, who'd been mostly quiet so far, narrowed his eyes. He had seen that kind of stance before, just not in this store. The clerk started talking, his words spilling out quickly. "So, this one's got a lot of kick. Might be a bit strong. Most people prefer something smaller at first. We've got a nice little option here that's easier to handle, you know, for home defense and all that." She lowered the rifle slightly and glanced at him. "What's the effective range on this?" she asked. He blinked. You mean like how far it can, shoot?" One of the men chuckled loudly. "She's been watching too many movies," he said. "Next she'll ask which one is best for sniper shots from the roof." The others burst into laughter. She didn't laugh. She didn't even smile. Her face stayed calm, almost gentle, as she looked back at the clerk and waited for a real answer. "The effective range," she repeated softly, "realistically, for accurate shots." The clerk shifted uncomfortably. "I mean, it's good. Couple 100 yards easy. Maybe more. Depends who's holding it." "Depends on training," she said, almost to herself. Then she raised the rifle again, checking the sights, adjusting the way it sat on her shoulder. The older man at the counter noticed how her eyes moved, how she didn't blink much when she lined up the imaginary target. Something about it bothered him, like a memory he couldn't fully grab. Another man at the counter leaned back and called over to her. "Hey, careful with that one. That thing will knock you flat if you're not used to it." The others laughed again, a little louder this time. They were performing for each other like they always did. She lowered the rifle and turned toward them. Her expression wasn't angry. It wasn't hurt. It was just patient. "I'll be fine," she said. Her answer was simple and calm. There was no sharp edge to her voice, no need to prove anything. That, more than anything, confused them. People usually got defensive when they were teased. They usually tried to show off. She didn't. One of the men rolled his eyes. "You ever even fired something like that before?" he asked, his tone half teasing, half challenging. She looked at him for a moment. Her gaze was steady but not hard. "A few times," she said. "A few times," he repeated mockingly. "Hear that? We got ourselves a pro over here." They laughed again, but this time the older man didn't. He was still watching her, studying little details. The way she carried herself, the way she moved her feet when she shifted from one position to another, the way her eyes never stayed in one place too long, always checking corners, exits, faces. He glanced at the bag slung over her shoulder. It was simple and worn, like something that had seen a lot of miles. Near the bottom edge, the fabric was faded, but not enough to hide a small stitched symbol. His brow furrowed as he tried to place where he'd seen it before. The clerk, sensing things were getting awkward, tried to lighten the mood. "So, if you want something easier," he said again, "I can show you a smaller rifle. Maybe something lighter. This one's really more for people who, shoot a lot." She kept her eyes on the rifle in her hands. "How long have you had this model in stock?" she asked. He hesitated. "A while. Not many folks here asking for it." "Because of the price?" she asked. "Price, recoil, range," he said. "Most people don't need that much. They like to talk about it, but when they feel the weight, they back off." She nodded, like his answer confirmed something in her mind. She checked the safety, then carefully handed the rifle back, her hands steady from start to finish. "I'd still like to know more about your range," she said. "Do you have one nearby? Or do you work with one?" The clerk scratched the back of his head. "There's a place just outside town," he said. "We send people there sometimes." "You thinking of starting out?" She tilted her head slightly. "Starting again," she replied. The older man at the counter finally spoke up, his voice rough but calm. "Where'd you learn to hold a rifle like that?" he asked. She looked over at him, and for the first time, a small, tired smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. "Far from here," she said quietly. The room fell into a soft, uncertain silence. The younger men didn't know what to do with her answer. The clerk shifted from one foot to the other, unsure whether to keep talking or just ring up some imaginary sale. Outside, a car door shut. The sound barely reached them through the walls. Inside the store, they went back to their half-joking, half-serious conversation. But something had changed. The older man still watched her with a thoughtful look, and she went back to studying the rifles, calm and focused, as if she was waiting for something or someone none of them could see coming yet. The minutes moved slowly inside the store, but she did not seem to be in a hurry. She walked along the wall of rifles like she was reading a long shelf of old books. Every now and then, she would pause, lean in, and study a small detail: a screw, a mark on the metal, a worn edge on the stock. The clerk watched her from behind the counter, leaning on his elbows. He tried to look relaxed, but something about her quiet focus bothered him. Most customers either bragged loudly or asked a lot of simple questions. She did neither. She just observed. He cleared his throat and tried again. "So, what are you planning to use it for?" he asked. "Hunting? Range days? Just, home safety?" She stopped in front of another rifle and spoke without turning around. "Long-distance practice," she said. "Controlled shots. Nothing fancy." "Nothing fancy," one of the men at the counter repeated under his breath with a smirk. "She talks like she's ordering coffee." The others chuckled. The older man sitting closest to the door didn't laugh. He was still studying her. He noticed the way she always kept a bit of space between herself and anyone walking behind her. He noticed how her gaze flicked to the reflection in the glass case when someone moved. He'd seen that kind of awareness in only one group of people before. She reached up to adjust the strap of her bag, and the older man caught another glimpse of that small stitched symbol near the bottom. It wasn't loud or colorful, just a faded thread pattern, but it meant something. His mind tried to bring back old images from years ago. A briefing room, a slide on a projector, a quiet explanation of who was arriving to support them. He remembered the same symbol on a shoulder patch, worn by people who arrived late at night and left before sunrise. "You said you're starting again," the older man said, breaking the silence. She looked over at him, one eyebrow raised slightly, waiting. He nodded toward the rifle wall. "You stop for a while?" he asked. "From shooting, I mean." She took a moment before answering. Her eyes dropped to her hands, then back to the older man. "Yes," she said. "Life went a different way for a bit." "You in law enforcement or something?" One of the younger men cut in, trying to drag the attention back to himself. "Security? Or is this like a new hobby?" The way he said hobby made it sound small. She shook her head. "No," she said. "Not law enforcement." "Video games, then," another man joked. "That's where everyone's an expert now, right?" They laughed again, and even the clerk gave a weak smile, trying to fit in. She turned away from them and focused on a display of scopes under the glass. Her fingers tapped lightly on the glass as she studied the numbers written on each tag. Magnification, brand, range. The clerk sighed and walked over to her with a ring of keys. He bent down, opened the case, and took out one of the scopes. "This one's popular," he said. "Good glass, decent price. Most people around here don't really need more than this." She took it gently from his hands and lifted it up, looking through it at the back wall of the store. She adjusted the focus ring with small, precise movements. The world on the other side sharpened, narrowed, became very clear. "How far is that wall from here?" she asked. He blinked. "I don't know. Maybe 20 meters? "Closer to 15, the older man said quietly. "Count your floor tiles." The clerk glanced down and realized the older man was probably right. She lowered the scope and gave the older man a small nod of respect. "Good eye," she said. He shrugged. "Used to have good eyes," he replied. "These days, they need help." She studied the scope again, then rested it carefully on the counter. "What distances do people usually shoot at the range outside town?" she asked. Real practice, not just taking pictures for social media. The question made the clerk a bit defensive. "People shoot for real," he said. "They take it seriously." "I'm sure some do," she said gently. "I just want to know the longest lane they have." He scratched his chin. "They've got up to 600 meters, I think," he said. "Most folks don't go that far. They stay at 100 or 200. She nodded slowly. "Do they let you bring your own spotter?" she asked. One of the men at the counter snorted. "Spotter?" he said. "What is this, a movie set?" The older man shot him a quick look, but stayed quiet. The clerk shrugged again. "You can bring whoever you want," he said, "as long as everyone follows the rules." "That's good," she said. "I prefer having someone watch the wind and give feedback." The younger men exchanged looks, rolling their eyes. "You talk like you're still on a field somewhere," one of them said. "Relax. This is a sleepy town, not a war zone." The word hung in the air for a second. She didn't flinch, but her jaw tightened just a little. The older man finally leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "You served?" he asked quietly. The whole store seemed to pause. Even the humming fridge in the corner felt louder in the sudden silence. She looked at him, and this time there was a question in her eyes, like she was trying to decide how much she wanted to share with a room full of strangers. For a while she said, "Here?" he asked. "Or overseas?" There was no pride in her voice, no dramatic pause. She just answered. "Overseas," she said. "Different places. It was a long time ago." One of the younger men gave an awkward laugh. "Oh, so you're one of those who did a few tours, and now everyone's supposed to bow down, huh?" The clerk winced. "Come on, man," he muttered. But it was too late. The words were out. She didn't react the way they expected. She didn't snap back or raise her voice. She just took a slow breath. "No one has to bow to anyone," she said. "I came here to buy a tool, not a trophy." Her voice was calm but carried a kind of weight that didn't match her thin frame. It wasn't a threat. It was just a statement that felt too honest to argue with. The older man watched her carefully. A half-formed memory finally clicked into place, a briefing slide. A voice saying, "If they arrive, listen to them. They're there because things are bad." He cleared his throat. "What branch?" he asked. She hesitated, then gave a small, almost tired smile. "Let's just say I spent a lot of time behind glass and metal," she said, gently tapping the scope with her finger. "Looking at things very far away." The older man understood. The younger ones did not. "So you were in recon or something?" one of them pushed. "Or is that all classified?" "Not important," she replied. "I left years ago." The clerk shifted from one foot to the other. He suddenly remembered the way she had handled the rifle, how natural it looked. It didn't feel like play acting now. "Is that why you stopped shooting?" he asked, his tone more careful this time. She looked down at her hands. For a moment, her face softened, as if some other place was pulling at her from inside her mind. "Sometimes it's hard to separate practice from old memories," she said calmly. "So I stepped away, for a while." The older man nodded slowly, understanding more from what she didn't say than what she did. "But you're back now," he said. "At least in here." For the first time since she walked in, she let out a short, quiet laugh. "Yes," she said. "I'm trying to be. Life doesn't always let you stay in one chapter forever." The clerk looked at her, then at the rifle wall, then back at the men at the counter. The jokes didn't feel as funny now. The room seemed smaller. "So what made you come back?" he asked. "To shooting, I mean." She took a breath and looked around the store, at the wood panels, the old posters, the rifles standing in neat rows. "Because I don't want fear to be the last voice in my head," she said softly. "I want discipline back. Routine. Focus. This is one way to do that." Her words surprised him. They were simple, but they felt heavy. No one laughed this time. A car rolled past outside, and the headlights traced across the front window for a brief second. The bell over the door rattled slightly as the wind pressed against it. The older man looked toward the door without meaning to. Something in the air had shifted, not in a loud way, just a quiet feeling that the day was about to turn into something the younger men would remember for a very long time. Inside, she rested her hand on the counter and waited, like a person who knew that sometimes the next moment in a small store could change more than just a shopping trip. The bell above the door rang again, a short, clear sound that cut through the quiet air of the store. Everyone turned their heads out of habit. In a small place like that, every new person was something to look at. A man stepped inside, bringing a bit of the cold air with him. He wore a neat uniform, pressed and clean, with ribbons on his chest and a cap tucked under his arm. His posture was straight, the kind of straight that did not come from a single day of trying to look good, but from years of standing in lines, giving orders, and taking them. The clerk straightened at once. He put his phone down and wiped his hands on the front of his shirt like he wanted to look busy. One of the younger men sat up a little taller, his joking face turning serious. "Afternoon, sir," the clerk said quickly. The man in uniform nodded in a polite way, eyes scanning the store. He seemed like someone used to walking into rooms and knowing where everyone was without thinking much about it. His gaze moved from the counter to the back wall, then to the racks of rifles. Then he saw her. She was standing near the glass case, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the counter, the other holding a small brochure the clerk had given her. She looked up when the door opened, expecting just another customer. The moment their eyes met, something shifted. His steps, which had been calm and steady, slowed. His face changed, just a little. It went from neutral to surprised, then to something that looked a lot like respect. The younger men saw none of the small details. They just noticed he had stopped walking. The older man noticed everything. The clerk, still in helpful mode, started to speak. "Can I help you with anything, sir? We've got." But the man in uniform didn't answer right away. He walked past the counter, past the stools, past the wall of rifles. The sound of his footsteps on the wooden floor seemed louder than they should have been in that small space. He stopped right in front of her. She did not move. She looked at him with quiet surprise, but there was no fear in her eyes. More like a person who was suddenly pulled back into a part of life she thought she had left behind. For half a second the store was completely silent. Then, in full view of everyone there, the man in uniform straightened even more, lifted his hand, and gave her a sharp, clean salute. The room seemed to shrink around them. The younger men just stared, their mouths slightly open. The clerk froze with his hand still on the edge of the glass case. The older man slowly rose a little from his stool, his eyes wide. She blinked, caught off guard, and a soft, almost pained expression crossed her face. After a moment, she returned the salute. Hers was slower, more humble, but it was perfect in form. "Good to see you, ma'am," he said quietly. His voice had changed. It was smoother, respectful. This was not how he spoke to strangers in stores. This was how he spoke to people he trusted with serious things. Her answer was simple. "You too, sir," she said. The word sir slipped out of her like a habit her body still remembered. No one else in the room knew where to put their eyes. The younger men glanced at each other, then at her, then at the man in uniform. They looked confused, off balance, like the ground had moved under them without warning. The clerk swallowed hard. He started, then stopped. There was nothing useful to say. The man in uniform lowered his hand and let out a breath, almost like he had not expected to see her there. "I didn't know you were in town," he said. "We thought you settled far away from all this." "Trying to," she replied softly. "Didn't quite manage it." There was a quiet understanding between them that had nothing to do with the store, the rifles, or the coffee cups on the counter. It was something older, something carried from one place to another in quiet memories and heavy nights. One of the younger men finally spoke, his voice cracking a bit. Sir?" he said. "Do you know her?" The man in uniform turned his head slightly toward the voice, then looked back at her. "Know her," he repeated, with a faint smile that was full of history. "Yes, I do." He faced the younger men fully now. "You should be standing up," he said calmly. "You're in the presence of someone who's earned more than just that chair." They exchanged confused looks. One of them pushed his stool back and stood slowly, unsure if this was a joke or not. The others followed, a bit awkwardly. The older man did not need to be told. He was already on his feet, his hand resting on the back of his stool, eyes steady on her. The clerk looked from the man in uniform to the woman and back again. I'm sorry, sir," he said, still lost. "I didn't realize." "Most people don't," the man in uniform replied, not unkindly. "That's all right. She never asks anyone to realize." She shifted her weight slightly, clearly uncomfortable with all the attention. "It's just a store," she said softly. "I came to look at tools, not cause a scene." "Too late for that," the older man murmured. But there was no humor in it. There was quiet respect. One of the younger men tried to pull himself together. "Sir," he said, "if you don't mind me asking, who is she?" The man in uniform glanced at her as if asking for silent permission to say more. She gave the smallest nod, but her eyes dropped to the floor for a moment, like she was bracing herself. He turned back to them. "She served under our flag for years," he said, "and not in an office, not behind a desk. She did the kind of work most people only talk about in stories." The younger men shifted in place. Their earlier jokes about video games and movies suddenly felt thin and hollow. "She was part of a team that kept a lot of people alive," he continued. "When things were loud, confused, and dangerous, she was the one who stayed calm. She saw the field through glass and numbers, and still made human choices." He did not go into detail. He did not talk about dates, locations, or events. He didn't need to. The way he spoke told enough. "She walked us through some very long nights," he said quietly. "Some of us are here today because she did not look away when it was easier to." She shifted again and cleared her throat gently. "That's enough," she said, her voice soft but firm. "It was a job. A hard one, but still a job. Many people did far more than I did." The man in uniform shook his head. "You always say that," he said, "and you're wrong every time." The clerk stared at her now in a completely new way. Gone was the picture in his head of a nervous beginner who needed a small, easy rifle. He remembered how she had handled the heavy one, how smoothly she moved, how she asked about real distances and spotters. One of the younger men rubbed the back of his neck. I didn't mean any disrespect," he mumbled. All the jokes, I mean. I was just talking. She looked at him, and there was no anger in her face, just something gentle and tired. I know, she said. You didn't know. That's why it's always better to be careful with your words. You never know who's in front of you. The older man gave a small nod, like he wanted to clap but knew it would feel wrong in that moment. The man in uniform smiled a little. Some of us still talk about you, you know, he said to her, about the way you kept your voice steady when everyone else was losing theirs. Please don't, she replied with a faint smile of her own. I'm trying to live a quiet life, he chuckled. You walked into the loudest corner of this town, he said, glancing at the group of men. Quiet is hard to find here. The tension in the room loosened slightly. The air felt lighter, even though the story under it all was still heavy. The clerk cleared his throat. Ma'am, he said, choosing the word carefully now, if you still want to look at that rifle, I can. Bring out any others you'd like to compare. And scopes. And, well, anything. She nodded. Thank you, she said. I appreciate that. The man in uniform took a small step back but stayed close, like someone who still felt responsible for her well-being, even outside any base or field. Through the store window, the street outside looked the same as always. Cars rolled past. A dog walked by with its owner. No one out there knew that inside the small gun store, a whole room had just learned that the quiet woman they laughed at carried more history in her silence than they had in all their loud stories combined. For a moment, nobody moved. The sound of the fridge humming in the corner and a faint car passing outside were the only things filling the silence. The man in uniform finally broke it. Do you remember the old outpost near the hills? He asked her quietly. The one with the broken radio tower and the wind that never stopped. Her eyes dropped for a second. The corners of her mouth lifted in a small, distant smile. How could I forget? She said. I still hear that tower squeaking in my sleep sometimes. The clerk and the younger men had no idea what place they were talking about, but they could feel the weight in the words. The older man leaned against his stool, listening closely. The man in uniform glanced around the room, then looked back at her. Back then, he said, we were sent there with a half-working map and less information than we needed. Supplies got delayed, weather turned bad, and we had no clear picture of what was around us. She stayed quiet, letting him tell it his way. We were blind, he continued, until she arrived with her team. They didn't show up with loud music or speeches. They came in quiet, set up their gear, and told us, we'll give you a clear view. You just listen. One of the younger men shifted uncomfortably. The idea of being blind out there made his earlier jokes feel small. The man in uniform gestured lightly toward her. She stayed awake for hours at a time, he said. Eyes on the glass, watching points on hills that all looked the same to the rest of us. She turned a confusing mess into something we could understand. She told us where it was safe to move, where not to go, when to wait, when to trust that things were under control. The clerk imagined her sitting somewhere cold and dark, staring through a scope while other people waited for her word. It didn't match the quiet woman standing in front of him, but at the same time, it did. She could have stayed behind the lines and never left the safe zone, the man in uniform said. But she didn't. She went forward with us more than once. Not because she had to, but because she didn't want to guide us from too far away. She wanted to share the risk. She shifted her weight, looking. The air in the store felt different now. The same old walls, the same racks, the same coffee smell, but the mood had changed. The laughter from earlier was gone. In its place there was a quiet respect and a little bit of shame hanging in the corners. The clerk stood with his hands on the counter, feeling like he needed to do something to make it right, even if he didn't know how. So, he said carefully, looking at her, you still want to see that rifle again, or maybe compare it with another one? She glanced at the wall of rifles and then back at him. Her face was calmer now, almost peaceful. Yes, she said. If you don't mind, I'd like to look at it again, and maybe one more beside it. Same range, similar use. Of course, he replied quickly. Absolutely. He hurried to the shelf, more careful than before. The older man stepped back a little to give her room. The younger men shifted to the side, no longer trying to be the center of the room. Their eyes were open now, truly paying attention. The man in uniform stayed close by, but he didn't speak. He watched, letting the moment belong to her. The clerk took down the rifle she had first picked up and placed it gently on the counter. Then he took another one from a different brand and laid it beside the first. "These two are our best options for what you described," he said. "Both solid, good history, reliable at longer distances." She stepped forward, rested her fingers on the stock of the first rifle, and lifted it with the same quiet confidence she had shown earlier. This time no one made a joke. No one rolled their eyes. She brought the rifle up to her shoulder and looked down the sights again. The store around her faded for a brief moment. The noise softened. The light through the front window blurred. Her breathing slowed, steady, and controlled. She wasn't aiming at anything real, but her body went through the motions as if it had done so 1,000 times before, which it had. She lowered the rifle, set it down, and picked up the second one. It was a little lighter, the balance slightly different. She took her time with it as well. No rush, no show. "What do you think?" the clerk asked gently. "They're both good," she said. "First one feels heavier but stable. Second one is easier to handle, but I'd want to check how it holds zero over time." The clerk nodded, impressed that she even thought to ask. "We've had good feedback on both," he said. "The first one's a bit more expensive, but some people swear by it. The second one hasn't given us problems either." The older man folded his arms. "If you ask me," he said, "you should choose the one your hands trust, not the one the tag likes." She smiled a little at that. "That's usually the way," she agreed. She lifted the first rifle one more time, feeling the weight settle against her shoulder again. Her fingers sat in the right places out of habit, not practice. "I'll take this one," she said finally. "The first." The clerk nodded. "Good choice," he said. "I'll get the paperwork started." He took the rifle to the other side of the counter, careful and respectful. While he began filling out the forms, the younger men stayed quiet. One of them kept staring at the floor. Another kept glancing at her like he wanted to say something, but didn't know how. The man in uniform stepped a little closer to her. "You sure you're ready?" he asked softly, only loud enough for her to hear. She looked at him and gave a small, steady nod. "If I wait until I feel completely ready," she said, "I'll never start. This is a step, a small one, but it's mine." He smiled, a warmth in his eyes that did not come from rank, but from something more human. "Then I'm glad I walked in today," he said. "I wouldn't have wanted you to take that step alone." The older man finally spoke up, clearing his throat. "Ma'am," he said. The words still new in his mouth. "For whatever it's worth, thank you. For what you did back then. And for reminding us today that we don't see the whole story when someone walks through a door." She turned to him and offered a polite nod. "Thank you," she replied. "But really, I'm just one person among many. There were a lot of others out there doing their part." "Maybe," he said. "But you're the one standing here. So you get this thank you." Her eyes softened. "I'll take it," she said quietly. One of the younger men finally gathered enough courage to speak. "Hey," he said, rubbing his hands together nervously. I want to say I'm sorry. For earlier, I was just trying to be funny. I didn't mean to, make light of anything real." She looked at him. She saw not a bad person, just someone who had never had to think too deeply about the things he was joking about. "I know you didn't mean harm," she said, "but words still land somewhere. Try to remember that next time. You don't have to walk on eggshells with everyone. Just be kind. You might be talking to someone who's already carrying more than you can imagine." He nodded, cheeks a little red. "I'll remember that," he said. "I promise." The clerk finished the forms and slid them toward her, explaining each part. She went through them calmly, answering what needed to be answered, signing where needed. The man in uniform glanced at the rack of scopes behind the glass. "She's going to need something decent on top of that," he said to the clerk. "Something that can keep up with her, not hold her back." The clerk nodded quickly, grateful for something practical to focus on. "We've got a few that would match well," he said. "I'll give a discount on the scope and mounts. You don't have to do that, she said, looking up. I know, he replied, but I want to. There was no pity in his voice, just simple respect. They picked out a scope together, something strong and clear, and arranged for it to be mounted properly. The clerk promised to have everything ready for her by the next day. You can pick it up tomorrow, he said. We'll have it bore-sighted and set. You can fine-tune it at the range. Thank you, she said. That helps. The man in uniform looked at his watch. I should get back, he said. They'll start wondering where I disappeared to. She nodded. Thank you for saying hello, she said, and for all of that. He shook his head slightly. All I did was tell the truth, he said. You're the one who did the work. Then he did something simple and human. He reached out his hand. She took it. Their handshake was firm but warm, two people who had shared storms without needing to say the names of those storms out loud. Take care of yourself, he said. I'm trying, she answered with a small smile. You too. He nodded at the others on his way out. The younger men straightened up again, but this time it wasn't about trying to look tough. It was about respect. When the door closed behind him, the bell rang once more, softer this time. The store felt quiet, but not empty. The older man sat back on his stool. The younger men moved aside, giving her a clear path. The clerk handed her a receipt and a copy of the order paperwork. If you ever need anything, the clerk said, advice, cleaning tools, whatever, just ask. We'll make time. She smiled gently. I appreciate that, she said. Really. She picked up her bag, adjusted the strap on her shoulder, and looked around the store one last time. It was still just a small-town gun store. Same walls, same racks, same old signs. But for her, it had become something else. For a moment, a place where she faced an old part of herself and did not run from it. As she walked toward the door, the older man spoke again. Ma'am, he called. She turned. Next time you're at the range, he said. If you ever feel like there's an old man who needs to learn a thing or two about long-distance shooting, I'll be there. She let out a real laugh this time, light and honest. I'll keep that in mind, she said. She stepped outside. The cold air touched her face. The sky above the town was wide and open, with slow clouds drifting across it. She stood still for a moment on the sidewalk, breathing, letting the day settle inside her. Behind her, inside the store, the younger men finally spoke again. But this time, the tone had changed. Their words were softer. They talked less about showing off and more about listening, learning, and not assuming they knew everything about people based on a first glance. The clerk cleaned the glass a little more carefully. The older man stared at the door, thinking about all the people he'd met in his life and how many of them had carried heavy stories that never showed on their faces. Out on the street, she started walking, one step at a time, a little straighter than when she had walked in. The rifle would be ready tomorrow. The range would be waiting. The wind would be there, the distance, the quiet focus. She didn't know exactly how it would feel, but she knew this much: she was moving forward, not backward, and somewhere, in a small gun store in a quiet town, a group of people would never again laugh so quickly at the sight of someone who didn't look the part. They had seen, in a single afternoon, that real strength often walks in softly, says little, and still changes everything.
Thanks for watching my video. Like, subscribe and share.